My name is Gary Naeyaert. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs and Public Relations for MAPSA, or Michigan's Charter Schools. This podcast is going to take a look at the state budget crisis, how it affects schools for both this year and next year. We'll also take a look at federal stimulus funding and how that's being used to offset the decline in state revenue. As you know, the primary source of school funding comes from the sales tax, and with unemployment at record levels, we have far fewer people spending money on discretionary items and contributing to the school aid fund through school taxes. Because of that, our revenue continues to fall. Unless something fairly dramatic happens in our economy, we're estimating that next year's school aid fund will have about $1 billion less in it than last year's school aid fund. You'll recall that earlier this year, it was necessary to cut per pupil spending by $370, and that was done after the conclusion of the school year. This was an alarming cut, even though we used federal stimulus funds to keep this gap filled and to keep schools whole. But here's a note on federal aid. The amount of money that Michigan has received for budget stabilization for schools is $1.2 billion. You should think of it as $750 per pupil for every student in the state. How we use it and when we use it is up to the legislature. Now we've used $370 of it last year, which means that we have $380 per pupil in federal aid to be used either this year or next. And as you likely know, just after 5 p.m. yesterday, Governor Granholm did sign into law the fiscal year 2010 school aid budget. And within this year's budget, schools must deal with a cut in the state's foundation allowance of just under $450 per student when compared with last year's original funding level. This cut will be deducted from your monthly state aid checks from Lansing. At the same time, all schools are eligible to draw down just about $285 per student in federal stimulus funds during this year. There is no separate application for these funds. They will not be added to your monthly state aid payments. These funds are available to be drawn down by way of the Cash Management System, or CSM. And you can be reimbursed for any eligible expense going back to September 1st. And schools are urged to draw down this money as soon as possible till it's paid to you. Now, utilizing all these federal funds the legislature has made available to us, you will have to experience a net reduction of $165 per student in total funding for this school year. That's the story that's been told up until now. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the story for the current school year budget. The truth is that the legislature and the governor have not agreed on precisely how to fund K-12 education this year. Their lack of an agreement on funding has produced a hole in the current school aid budget of up to $100 million. At the same time, sales tax revenue is coming in much less than anticipated by economists. And this will leave a hole of at least $130 million in the school aid fund for the current year. So unless the governor and the legislature can agree on new revenues for schools, or unless we have a fast turnaround in our economy, your school should prepare for another mid-year correction and a potential cut of nearly $150 per student yet this school year. Now the state is holding on to just under $100 per student in those federal stimulus funds that they would like to use next year. And the legislature could choose to advance those funds and use them now instead of later, and that is yet to be seen. But as you look at fiscal year 2011, or next year, it gets even more bleak. As of today, we at MAPSA are projecting a reduction in the state foundation grant of at least $600 per pupil in state aid for next year when compared to last year. And we will likely have used up most, if not all, of any federal stimulus funds that remain in order to backfill this cut. So MAPSA is working every day to address real education reform in Lansing and to help our schools to deal with the funding reductions here first. And we will work on reductions and we will work on reforms before we turn our attention toward the issue of additional revenue for public education in Michigan. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. If you have specific questions that weren't answered here, please feel free to contact me at MAPSA. Have a great day.